I recently picked up Dishonored 2 on GOG as it recently went on sale. As I had recently replayed Thief Gold, I was in a immersive sim, stealthy kind of mode, so I made the purchase. I'm a big fan of the Dishonored series. I think Dishonored 1 is one of the best games in the last decade or so, definitely one of the more interesting original ones to come out. That said, there's still just a few flaws that also showed up in the sequel that, for me, hold it just short of being a classic. I do realize that it's been about 3.5 years since the game came out, but I've kept away from it for various reasons. One, just letting it get to a lower price point, but also hearing about the botched PC launch and the muted reception that seemed to follow it. I was very happy with my purchase with Dishonored 2. There's a bunch of little things it took from Dishonored and improved on the formula. Levels were even better this time around as well. There's a couple of examples, which I'll get to later in the video, that are notable standouts in breaking the Dishonored formula and making truly great experiences. Well, I do think everyone should check out Dishonored and Dishonored 2. To note, I still think there's just a few things that, with the small tweaks, can really make this game what I consider a classic. As of now, it still falls short of other immersive sims like Thief, Thief 2, System Shock 2, Deus Ex, just to name a few. I am disappointed to see that the game didn't sell well as they were hoping for, and the series is on shelves as of time speaking. Now, it's too bad because Arkane really does have put out some good games, and they're kind of on the last forebearers in the immersive sim genre. I know they do have another game coming up. As of writing this video, I don't know what's going to be about, but there's enough here in this Dishonored world to definitely take another crack at it, and I would love to see a Dishonored 3. For those who play tabletop role-playing games, I highly recommend Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark came out just a few years ago, was a successful Kickstarter that's heavily influenced by the world of Dishonored. So if you still want some of that kind of Dishonored fix, you can't find it in games, well, you can find it in a tabletop game, and I highly recommend checking out Blades in the Dark. I'll have some links in the description about it. Before I go into full details about my analysis of Dishonored 2, I want to talk about a few things first about how I played the game. Firstly, I have a reasonable mid to high-end laptop that at this point though is about half a decade old. Running Dishonored 2, it ran okay. Now, I know the game's been out for 3.5 years, and it had a terrible PC launch, and there had been some patches fixed up by then, but it still is poorly optimized, and just too bad, because this world is beautiful. I did find a few fixes online to help boost some of the FPS and improve performance, so I'm using some footage I found on YouTube for various gameplay. I will provide the links to these gameplay videos in the description below. When it comes to difficulty, I played the game on the custom difficulty, with most things set to the hardest settings. Now, I mentioned a previous video about difficulty settings in games and how they could be more interesting. There'll be a card up here now, and there'll also be a link in the description. That allowing for custom difficulty is a really interesting thing, and I wish that more developers would take after people like Arkane Studios who have done that, and especially for Dishonored 2. Sometimes I find with just a easy, medium, hard difficulty, you'd like to maybe tweak a few things here and there to balance the challenge versus the frustration. Having this ability to pick and choose what I want to put higher or lower in difficulty is really great. And throughout my playthrough, I did adjust it a couple times early on to find something that worked that was challenging enough, but not to the point that got overly frustrating. Another thing I did with the game is playing it with very little of the HUD available. In a previous video on quest markers and mini-maps, I pointed out how I'm not a fan of them and how they can detract from the experience when all you're really doing is staring at this little corner of your screen to find out where you need to go. There will be a card for the video up here now and again in the description. Now, of course, Dishonored 2 does have this option available. It's set on default to tell you where your objective is, where to find the person you're looking for, or where you need to go. But I turned that off, and there was only at one point in the game that I need to turn it back on to find something, as it wasn't really clear where I needed to go. Which I really appreciated that I could play the game without that available. Sadly, and this is more of a tangent, that a lot of modern games can get in the way of this, where if you do try and turn off the minimap or quest marker, it becomes very difficult or near impossible to find certain things. Finally, as you could choose between two characters in this game, I played my campaign through with Emily. I did do a few levels afterwards checking it out with Corvo, but I didn't do the whole campaign with him. It looks like most people were in agreement with me, with about 28% of people on Steam achievements showing they beat the game with Emily, and Corvo being around 19.5% of players finishing the game. Now, I know Steam achievements aren't like a 100% accurate representation of what people did, but that just kind of gives a good idea of what people used on that front. With that out of the way, let's break down now what this video is going to cover from here on in. Firstly, we're going to talk about the gameplay of Dishonored 2, what I liked about it, what I thought could need improvement, some of the things that I improved over Dishonored 1. Secondly, we'll take a look through the game level by level. I'll cover some of the plot beats here, what I liked about them, what I didn't like about them. Thirdly, we'll look more at the story as a whole and the world of Dishonored, what I like about it and what I didn't like about it and what I'd like to see improved. Finally, looking at the, I don't want to call it outright failure, but disappointing sales of the game. What led to it after the first game doing quite well, and now being that the Dishonored series is not being continued by Arkane. So let's dive in.
Still idling? Take this opportunity to backcharge second coil. Extra diagnostic playback loop.
Dishonored 2 continues in the tradition that Dishonored 1 did with its immersive sim stealth action gameplay. Yes, I know that's a mouthful, and immersive sim's kind of a weird term, but you know how it is if you played these kind of games. If you played Dishonored 1, you will be right at home with Dishonored 2. But with some improvements here and there to the formula. The largest factor being that now this time around you can play as two characters. As it's been 15 years since the first game, Emily Caldwin has grown up, and you have the option to play as her, as I did, and looking at the Steam achievements, more people did as well as opposed to Corvo. Emily has different powers than Corvo. Now, of course, there's a lot of overlaps. She has her own version of Blink known as Far Reach that is slightly different, but does have some differences. When you upgrade it, you could start pulling enemies towards you or items towards you. While she does have an array of abilities, I do find I was going towards Far Reach and also Domino. Now, Domino is where you could connect people together up to 4, like a dominoes. Ha 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 ha. With Domino, when you've selected, if you've selected a group of 4, what you do to one will happen to the other. You shoot one with a sleep dart, they'll all go down. If you kill one, they'll all go down. If you use Far Reach to grab them, they'll all go flying. There's so many interesting possibilities that you could do with this game in using your powers, with the environment, with the items you have available. And the amounts are sheer endlessness. It's really fascinating to watch some various videos on YouTube. For example, Stealth Gamer, who I will link to in the descriptions below, has some incredible stealth runs. Just watching him, it's like we're playing two completely different games. I have to note, due to the nature of Dishonored and the way the gameplay is, it's an easy game where you want to save scum, where you enter a room with 3 guards and you decide to save, and if something goes wrong, instead of dealing with the consequences, you quick load. Now, I talked about this in my video on save scumming and how gamers and developers should try to cut down on that. But I know the temptation is there with these kind of things. But at least in a game like Dishonored, when if you do get caught, it's not the end of the world with all your abilities you get to use. One of your upgrade abilities allows you to compose yourself if you get caught, where there's that moment like in Metal Gear Solid 5 when you get seen by a guard where it goes into slow motion for a bit, where you have that time to take care of the enemy. Now, the next bit I'm going to talk about here doesn't just focus on Dishonored and Dishonored 2, but most stealth games in general, with the exceptions being the Thief series. My issue is the over-reliance on visuals and not using something like sound, which I still think is a very underused design factor that the Thief series used. In the Thief series, you didn't have this huge HUD telling you where enemies were looking and if you're being detected. All you really had was your little meter at the bottom showing you how much you were exposed in the light or darkness, but also the noise that you're making on the surfaces. Whether you were on a marble flooring surface or soft grass, You could tell with enemies where they were located with the sound positioning and the audio. There was no ability in the Thief games to see through walls, which is an ability that you can make use of in the Dishonored series and most stealth games these days. Now, of course, to make up for that fact, you do have all these powers that you could use. In Thief, you were very limited in what you had at your disposal. But there's also the option of playing a no power run, where you don't get any abilities from the outsider. And in that case, when this game is very visual, it could be very tough to play without those powers. It's not really clear if you're in the darkness or the light, if enemies could see you from a distance. Now, their bar will fill up if you have that enabled to see how long they're going to come investigate the area, or if they do notice you. I would like to see a light exposure bar like the Thief series. While you can hear enemy footsteps, they're not so prominent like they were in the Thief series, and you can't really judge that closely of where the enemy is. Now, I know this is a bit of a nitpick, and I am a big fan of the Thief series, and I would love to see more games in the stealth genre use more of the sound than relying on visuals and tracking and seeing through walls. But I did want to make mention of it. Because at times I never really found it clear if I was going to be visible or not with the lighting, or how far away I was, or what kind of noise I was making. Anyways, that can go into a whole different kind of rant. I want to talk a little bit about the chaos system. Now, in the first game, the chaos system had interesting ideas, but unfortunately the execution was, well, for the most part, lacking. Now, at the time of release, the whole morality system was, in some ways, quite trendy at the time. I felt like Dishonored 1, in a way, did try to continue with that, to the detriment of the game itself. In the first game, despite what you do with everything, you only have two endings, a good ending, or low chaos ending, and a high chaos ending. Now, there were a few interesting things the chaos system did do in the game. For example, how Emily drew Corvo. If you did low chaos, he's much more happy, as opposed to a high chaos where, well, a little more dark. I'm happy to say that they've definitely improved the chaos system in the sequel, especially when it comes to the ending. As opposed to just having the two ending possibilities, you have a Fallout-style slideshow of all the choices you made along the way, of how you dealt with assassination targets and what you did with your chaos level, which is much more interesting. To summarize this portion, the gameplay for Dishonored is rock solid. The controls are great. It feels great. These abilities you have that you could chain together with your items make for some very creative playthroughs that you could do. But let's start looking through the rest of the game. Let's break it down level by level. Look at the story, the plot, and the overarching world that is the Dishonored series.
Still idling? Take this opportunity to backcharge second coil.
It's now 15 years since the event of Dishonored 1, and you start off as Emily making her way to the throne. With that, we have hey, look at that, it's a talking Corvo.
Every year, I think the anniversary of Jessamine's death will be easier, but it never is.
I wish Mother was still the Empress. I don't think I'm very good at this.
You're still learning. Don't worry about the rabble-rousers, and we'll catch the crown killer, eventually.
Which is an interesting change considering how Corvo was a silent protagonist in the first game. Now, I have to say, it is quite fitting in a way that they were able to get Stephen Russell, the voice of Garrett from the first three Thief games, for this role. Now, I know there was talk with Thief 4 of getting Stephen Russell, which didn't happen, and seeing how Thief 4 turned out, that is for the best. From here, we have a visit from Duke Luca Abel. He's arrived with a couple of Clockwork soldiers, which are interesting mechanical robots, guards, which we will get to later in the game. And out pops Delilah? The one we took care of the DLC in Dishonored 1?
Family, I present the lost sister of Jessamine Caldwin, your rightful Empress, Delilah Caldwin.
Impossible.
My mother?
And she's claiming to be the sister of Jessamine Caldwin? What? Hold on here. What? Okay, just before we get into that, and it's from here you could decide whether you play as Emily or Corvo. Now, I have to say, there is a ton to unpack here. The idea behind this intro of a coup arising, it's fine. The execution itself, ugh. What they do here is they jump right into it in literally 5 minutes. Now, that's okay, but it felt like here they could have definitely used a little breathing room before this happened. Give us some time to know and interact with these characters and a chance for care to them. I mean, this is our first time hearing Corvo speak. Like, give us a little bit of time before this happens. They also could have done a in media res introduction where the coup had already just happened and perhaps you're escaping and right to the thick of things. Maybe at this point Delilah has had the throne for a bit and you're on the run. Now, I have to say Dishonored 1 had this problem as well, as it got to things very quickly. And especially in that game, it would have been much better to take it slow, as this is our introduction to the world of Dishonored. Could a in media res beginning have happened here? Would it have made sense? For example, look at Mass Effect 2's excellent introduction. Well, before the resurrection of Shepard, where you're on the ship and it gets blasted to hell. Fantastic, very memorable introduction. Deus Ex Mankind Divided, a video I probably will be covering in the future, also has an in media res introduction. Now, the idea is good, the execution's a little off, but I do appreciate how they just got right into the thick of things. I've seen other people point out that bringing back Delilah again as the villain does feel a little bit cheap. And to bring her back from the void after all these years and seeing, like, her character was played through in the DLC. Like, there wasn't seen much more to really explore on that front. The idea of being overthrown by a coup, like, it's happened throughout history. It's a very good starting point for a story that is very political, like Dishonored. I just think that pulling Delilah as that individual to overthrow the Caldwins is not really the best choice, and it does feel odd that she is claiming to be a Caldwin. There's a lot I could really rant about here, but I'm going to move on now. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I did decide to play as Emily, and from here, Corvo ends up as a statue until the end of the game when we come back here again. We have two main goals here now. First is to get out of Dunwall, and the other is to kill Ramsey, or you could take the non-lethal approach with him. This one, no hesitation. I killed Ramsey, just like that.
Goodbye, you entitled bastard.
You don't have your powers yet, so this mission, you know, it's all right. There's nothing like too memorable about it. I mean, you will be coming back to it later. From there, you make your way to the ship, the Dreadful Whale, and you meet Megan Foster. And now we have our introduction. We're off to go find Anton Sokolov, a notable character in the first game, to see what can be done about Delilah. So no more Dunwall for the rest of the game until the very end. We're off to Karnaca. Find out more about this crown killer that was mentioned the first time around. The crown killer being a figure that's been killing all of Emily's political enemies that are speaking out against her. An interesting point to go off of. First, we're back on the boat, and then we have our first encounter with the outsider. I mean, wait, what's with that voice? Huh?
I never expected us to meet. I watched your mother die at the hands of schemers who wanted your little empire. Then you were rescued by a killer in a strange mask.
Now this is the outsider.
In the days that follow, your trials will be great, Corvo. Seek the ancient runes bearing my mark in the lonely places of your world, and at shrines raised in my name.
To be clear, I did come around to this outsider's voice and attitude later on in the game, but he still fell in contrast to the first game, which he just had much more of this mysterious figure with that voice he had. Oh well. From here, we could accept the powers or do a no power run. We could use the heart now on other characters. Now we're in sunny Karnaca, which is a nice change of pace and scenery. It's the classic sequel treatment of going somewhere more sunny. It's a solid level that introduces you to some of the new things of the game, like the bloatflies, which play a much more larger part as opposed to, say, the rats in the first game. Some of these points with bloatflies in the game can be frustrating. Some are kind of nice little challenges of finding your way around the room. I didn't dislike them, but I didn't love them as a factor in the game. Eventually, we're making our way to Adamir Institute, and I have to say, I do like the tram rides over to the island. It definitely gives me that mist feeling. This is, to me, where the game really starts to shine and open up. Lots of verticality, lots of areas to explore, lots of information to find. Alexandria Hypatia created the Adamir solution, but due to some past serum research gone wrong, she did have some side effects which do create a side personality for her. When you eventually make your way to her, you could tell something right away is a little off about her.
I'm not here for treatment. I'm looking for Anton Sokolov.
Sokolov? Yes, he was here for a short time, but she took him away to see Kirin Jindosh. Do you hear something?
What about the Crown Killer? The patient of yours?
The Crown Killer?
And then we get the revelation that she's the Crown Killer. Oh, it's fine. I honestly thought first this was going to be drawn out throughout the game, but they throw it out there pretty quickly. From there, we have a couple of options. We could just kill her as is, or we could do the non-lethal option, which takes a little more work and producing a cure for what she's going through, which feels a little convenient, but so be it. I do think it would have been more interesting if she moved around the level as you went to assemble the cure, as opposed to her just staying in the same room. In my playthrough, I decided to save her. We end up with the Princess is Another Castle trope with Sokolov not being here, but we're given directions of where he can find him. Granted, I mean, this is a time-old trope, and it's not like a bad thing. I mean, Witcher 3 pulled this off time and time over again with Ciri. All in all, this is where the game really starts to kick in, and I really love this level. Next up, we have the Clockwork Mansion, which to many is the best level in the game and just one of the most memorable levels in recent years, and I would have to agree with it. I heard a lot about this level coming into it, so I was hoping to live up to expectations, which it did. You don't get to the mansion right away. You go through a couple of areas of making your way through streets, again, working your way through windows and hidden areas. It's all good stuff, good solid Dishonored material. The mansion is owned by Kirin Jindosh, who's a grand inventor for the Duke, and the man who produced the Clockwork Soldiers that we saw at the beginning of the game. You could briefly talk with him, and you could also see how the mansion works with transformation of the rooms by pulling levers. There's a lot to unpack here. Firstly, let's talk about the Clockwork Soldiers themselves. I love their look, and I really love how it's a voice recording of Jindosh himself. It gives a lot of insight into the character of Jindosh.
Idling. Commence lens refocus. Still idling. Take this opportunity to backcharge second coil.
You also have a number of different ways in dealing with the Clockwork Soldiers. From taking off their head, which makes them attack anything. You could rewire them, take off their arms. Fantastic enemies. Secondly is Jindosh himself. By far, Jindosh is the best character in this game. And we get a lot to learn about him through the Clockwork Soldier or over the intercom when he's making comments about you as you're sneaking your way throughout. I'll talk more about characters later in this video, but it's very clear that who Jindosh is, and I think it's really clever that they use the Clockwork Soldiers to help exemplify who he is. Thirdly is the level itself, transforming rooms into different setups, and the fact that you could go into the spaces between when they're transforming gives you that feeling of being someplace that you shouldn't be. And they're really interesting, fun discoveries, and it leads to a lot of creativity in how you make your way around it. Absolute props to Arkane Studios for coming up with such a brilliant design. I do also have to say I definitely got a lot of BioShock vibes from this level, and I found that I was kind of thinking about why for a while there, and I definitely found Jindosh did remind me of Saturn Cohen and the fan favorite Fort Frolic level. Being tortured by Jindosh, Sokolov, who is a former mentor to Jindosh, suggests that you kill him, as it will help stop with the soldiers that are being built. Now, you also do have the option of using some of his equipment against him, so Jindosh just basically loses his intelligence. And I wish the game could have pursued this a little more, because you have an interesting question here. Here you have this brilliant man who's producing these clockwork soldiers. But what if you could convince him otherwise? What if you could convince him to build something for good? Fortunately, the game doesn't go that way. Instead, you either kill him or you strip him of his intelligence. Not a huge thing that you don't have that option of trying to bring him to your side, and I would love to see, but it wasn't there. All in all, fantastic mission. The $10 I paid for the game on sale was more than worth it for this level alone. We get Sokolov, and now we're going after Brianna Ashworth, an ally who was part of the coup, and has a mysterious device that she's building with Delilah. Before we get to the mission itself, we do have a bit here where we enter the void and we get to talk with Delilah a bit. She gives some backstory about her tragic past and how she is an illegitimate daughter and sister to Jessamine. I do feel the game is trying to give you some sympathy for who Delilah is, but I just find it falling a bit flat. It's not like a huge amount of characterization I find to Delilah's story. And of course, I was questioning the entire time if she is telling the truth here. It just feels so weird to throw her out there as an illegitimate Kaldwin. This is the first time you get to encounter the witches in the game, which you encountered in the DLC for Dishonored 1. You have the option of killing Brianna or severing her connection to the void for your non-lethal option, which requires a few more steps. In my game, I ended up doing the non-lethal choice. An interesting thing here is you could also talk to Delilah with the statue in Brianna's office. I do have to mention at this point, whenever I hear Delilah, well, this is what I think of.
Hey there, Delilah, what's it like in Dunwall City? I'm 1,000 miles away, and bitch, it's really such a pity to have fled. You've got my city bathed in dread. I'll have your head.
Give that video some love. I'll post the link to it in the description. Moving on to the Dust District. Now there's a little gimmick in this level where the dust blows every few minutes to greatly reduce visibility. It's an interesting thing to have, but I didn't find myself using it at any point, just due to with all my powers and stealth abilities. But again, nice thing to have there. What's very interesting is as you're trying to make your way to a mansion here, is you could try to solve this riddle right off the bat in the very beginning of the level. And that's what I tried to do initially. Now, what's interesting about this riddle is you can't look up an answer on the internet. The riddle deals with people, items, colors, where they're sitting at a table, and where they're from. And it twists those all around. I sat down for a bit with some notepad and tried to figure it all out using one of those logic grids. And I realized, all right, this is going to take too long. I'm not good at these, so I'm just going to do the level as is. But I do find it really interesting that they offer this ability to outright skip the level and move on to the next one. Looking at Steam achievements, it looked like about 10% of people actually went through and did the riddle, so that's interesting to look at. And that said, the level itself is really good. You have the choice of helping the Howlers, led by Paolo, or the Overseers, led by Overseer Byrne. Both sides are hostile to you until you get the body of the other leader, either Byrne or Paolo, and bring it to the other side. Now, Paolo can also be encountered at the beginning of the Clockwork Mansion when you go to the Black Market. And hey, I recognize that charming voice.
We've been at war with the Abbey, not just over territory, but over the people of Karnaca as well. This is my home.
Byrne Martell. Well, it's good to see you in this game. I think I'm going to go and help you, which is what I did in my playthrough, and I ended up killing Overseer Byrne. The interesting thing about Overseer Byrne is listening to him talk, I thought, that voice sounds really familiar. And it was. Overseer Byrne is voiced by Jamie Hector, who all Wire fans will know as Marlo Stanfield.
I need you to walk back up there and pack up your people. I'm being a gentleman about it for the moment.
Now, of course, you could also kill both of them or outright skip it if you solve the riddle. There's a lot of interesting combinations here of what you could do. Another one I read about is you can knock them both out and place them in boxes to be exchanged for 2 prisoners, and they go work in the mines. Again, a lot of really interesting choices here that will impact the ending. With that, when you bring one of the bodies to the other side's leader, you get the code that you could use to get to the mansion. I have a hard time deciding if this mission is better than the Clockwork Mansion. Now, right off the start, no runes, no powers, and it looks pretty straightforward to begin with. Like, you know something's up as it's pointed you right where you need to go find Aramis Stilton. Kind of reminds me of the beginning of Fort Frolic from BioShock, where you're given a clear path to go to the next level, and you just know, well, something's obviously going to happen. And something does happen here. Now, as was mentioned in the previous levels, something happened at this mansion 3 years ago, something involving Delilah. And that's what you're here to find out. Aramis Stilton is clearly off his tits, and the outsider comes and gives you a little device that you could use as opposed to your powers. And what you end up with is a very cool feature. While you can't blink or far reach around or use any of your abilities, you could change back and forth through time in this level with this device. It leads to some really cool, interesting things you could do for sneaking around. Some areas are not accessible in the present while they are in the past, and vice versa. It's really interesting to look back and forth with this device where you currently are and, say, looking at the past, seeing all these guards move around you. It's also a fun way to mix up with the stealth, and if a guard does see you, well, you could just jump to the other timeline. With Stilton, you have a few options. First, you do get the notebook that allows you to go to the area where the ritual is being held. But you do have a few options here within the past. Firstly, you could knock out Stilton, you could kill Stilton, or you could just leave him as is. If you leave him as is, nothing changes about the present time. He's still crazy. Well, in the past, if you knock him out, he doesn't take part in the ritual, and going back to the present, the level will be fine as is. Or if you kill him, the mansion will be empty. Very interesting choices here. With that, you still make your way to a study where the ritual is being held, and you see how Delilah is brought back from the void. There's something interesting here you could do with the heart and using it on Delilah. Jessamine talks about how they used to play together, but the wording she uses for it suggests that they are not related and that Delilah is not the daughter of Jessamine's father. It doesn't outright say it or deny it, so there is some ambiguity here. I will provide a link below to a video that goes over the dialogue that you could use with the heart in this scene. I have to say, Stilton as a character is kind of weird. He's a miner who moved up the ranks and eventually is running Stilton Mines. He treats his employees well, gives them good benefits, holidays, even though in the face of getting more pressure from others to push workers harder. He doesn't want to host the ritual, but he's kind of coerced into doing it. Doesn't really feel like there's a whole lot of depth to his character. We know he's good to his workers, but is there any conflict there? Are there any shady dealings he has to keep the workers happy as is? It'd been more interesting to see him more like, say, a Jimmy Hoffa kind of figure who had all these great intentions, but had these other shady dealings going on as well. Again, they could have definitely done some more in-depth things with the character here, but they didn't, which is the norm with this game, but so be it. All said, love this level. Absolutely phenomenal. I'm not sure if I like as much as the Clockwork level. It doesn't feel as replayable, but the time warping can lead to some really creative things that you could do, even though you have no powers. So once this is done and you leave the mansion, you have another encounter with the outsider, and he explains his origins? Why did they include this? We didn't need to know where the outsider comes from. He's fine as this trickster god, Lovecraftian, mysterious entity. We don't need to know where he comes from and why he is. So what does the game do? Well, it goes here and explains how he came to be. Didn't Arkane see what happened with BioWare and Mass Effect? I mean, Mass Effect never needed to explain the Reapers. You have these Lovecraftian figures of destruction. And just look at how utterly detested that ending had to when they explained what these Reapers, these Lovecraftian creatures of destruction, what happens when they explain their origin. Granted, this isn't a game breaker by any stretch, but it was absolutely not needed in the game. Now, I know there's the expansion, the Death of the Outsider, which I have not played, and of course it does give away more about that, but this is one thing that we didn't need to know about this. We are now on the final stretch here of the game. We're going to the Grand Palace to deal with Duke Luca Abel. It's funny that once I started playing this level, took me a bit to realize I could use powers again after the previous level did not allow you to do so. Again, another really solid level. Nothing, not like outstanding compared to the Clockwork Mansion in the previous level, but a great level nonetheless. It's nice to see the Clockwork soldiers return. They were a fantastic enemy, and I kind of wish the game made more use of them. I do find the non-lethal choice here very interesting and somewhat amusing, as Duke LaBelle has a body double he uses in case of assassination attempts. Once you determine which one is which, you could convince him to pose as the real Duke and take over. I do find it a little convenient how he just goes along with it, but he does mention that he hates him, so whatever. This is the choice that I ended up doing, and it's pretty funny to watch it where they're pulling the real Abel away, knowing that he's actually, he is the real one, and they're putting him away in the asylum.
Please arrest this clown. Seems that he took his role a little too seriously. Get your hands off me! One man. He served me well for years. We'll never find anyone else who so bears my resemblance. Take him away, Captain. But be gentle.
I think I understand, Your Eminence. We'll handle it.
What? This is outrageous. I'll have you all skinned alive and set in a salt bath. If only there was something we could do.
From here, you also get Delilah's spirit, which now becomes the voice of the heart for the rest of the game, as we're nearing its end. Fortunately, she doesn't have that much to say or anything overly interesting, but it is a nice little change. We are now at the last level of the game, and depending on your chaos level, Megan will reveal that she is, oh my god, she's Billy Lurk! Dun dun dun! Okay, that all said, of course, it was pretty obvious, and it's not like that was a secret. And she does talk to Emily in my game of how she played her part in her mother's assassination, and you have the option of forgiving and condemning her. And in my game, I forgave her. You know, she did help me all this way, so, you know, let bygones be bygones. So you go back the way you came from the very first level, with some changes here and there. Look at all those guards hanging up. And now there's witches, and things look a little less, nice. Again, another solid level here. That's kind of how it felt overall a lot of this game. I didn't find any levels I outright disliked, besides maybe the first level, which was kind of meant to me. But we are coming back to it again with powers. And it is nice to see a level from the previous Dishonored back and with some twists added to it and changes since it's been 15 years. So I straight up killed Delilah. You know, I just thought, yep, that was it. But I do have to say the non-lethal ending is very clever and quite fitting, where you could trap her in her painted world where she lives out her fantasies in a way very fitting for her.
You wanted to rule a world of your own, Delilah. So be it.
At last, what I've always deserved. My justice. Now what's always been marred and distorted will be perfect. I've waited so long. Sing my songs and lick my flesh. Worship me.
Hey there, Nevaya. It's like in New York City, I'm so 1,000 miles away, but girl, tonight you look so pretty, yes you do. Times Square shine as bright as you, I swear it's true.
And with that, we wrap up Dishonored 2. We end up with the ending slides and the style follow, and it talks about like what you did, who you assassinated, who you didn't assassinate, how those changes, your chaos level, and how that changes things. And I like this far, far more than the first game, where it was either the good or bad ending.
Still idling? Take this opportunity to backcharge second coil. Extra diagnostic playback loop.
Going a little more about this story is, in a nutshell, I love the world that they've created for Dishonored. It's a very interesting setting. I love the time frame, the influence of it, the factions, the history. There's tons of interesting stuff to play with there. Problem I do find of this and where it falls short is this isn't just also for Dishonored 2, this is for Dishonored 1, is I'm not really given enough to care about these characters. Compare this to something like Mass Effect, a game which, like Dishonored, has incredible depth levels of lore. Now, Dishonored doesn't have the same extent when it comes to its lore, but it is still very deep on that front. But the difference here is the Mass Effect game has just fantastic characters. Now, even though Mass Effect 2 really doesn't do anything to drive the plot forward, for a lot of people, including myself, it's actually their favorite Mass Effect because of the character interactions and the character stories that you deal with. Again, Dishonored has great levels of details for its settings, its factions, its ideas, the political intrigue. But I find for the most part, characters just really aren't that interesting. I do like Jindosh, don't get me wrong, he's very cool. And I do appreciate that they do have Stephen Russell voicing Corvo. But there just really wasn't enough there to get me to care about these characters. Now again, this is also an issue with the first Dishonored, but even I feel it more here. The idea of a coup overthrowing the Caldwins, great starting point. And like I said, you go to interesting places, you interact with interesting factions, and it's all there. And it still just falls a bit short for me, a bit flat. They kind of had the issue if you brought in a new character for a coup that it would feel, well, who is this character and why should we care about them? So that's why maybe they went with Delilah, who's a character we dealt with in the past as a villain, but we took care of her. Her arc ended in the DLCs for Dishonored 1. It just felt a little cheap to bring her back. In the end, I really love Dishonored 2, and I do think it's a great sequel. But the thing is, there's a lot more that they could really do with this world. But unfortunately, it looks like maybe forever, we're not going to be seeing this world again.
Still idling? Take this opportunity to backcharge second coil. Extra diagnostic playback loop.
Now, it wasn't a outright sales disappointment, but it's very different compared to Dishonored 1. Dishonored 1 ended up selling very well, especially on PC, but Dishonored 2 sales were down 40% at launch. Now, the first game felt like it could stand on its own and maybe it didn't need a sequel, but the thing is still that people and critics really love Dishonored. If you look at the highest ranked games on Steam in regards to positive reviews, Dishonored is currently sitting at number 30, so a very, very highly reviewed game. Well, we could start with one thing, is the botched PC launch. The launch of Dishonored 2 on PC was absolutely disastrous, the stories I heard about. It's one of the more noticeable ones I've heard about in the last half decade or so. High-end PCs couldn't really do much with the game at all, and there was stuttering and low FPS. Reviews were negative on Steam about the performance. That first week is so key for sales. And if players are sharing their day one experiences, people are going to very least wait for sale that might not come for months, or not play the game at all. Now, to also note, Dishonored 2 used the Void engine, which is based on id Tech 5, as opposed to the Unreal 3 engine that the first game ran. So this definitely plays a factor in Dishonored 2 not doing so well in regards to sales, especially for PC. I also want to talk about the niche factor of immersive sims. Now, immersive sims always kind of a weird word to describe these games, but it does get its point across. I mean, games like Thief, the Thief series, System Shock, Deus Ex, for the most part, they really haven't been huge sellers. BioShock, although I kind of argue that's more of a immersive sim light or immersive sim influence, are kind of those exceptions. But that is the exception and not the norm. And that's fine that you have your niche audience that really enjoys these games, people who will play these games over and over. I've known people who've replayed Dishonored at least a dozen times. I played through it about 2 or 3. Yes, these games have a niche audience. The problem is when publishers don't want to risk their investments into a game like that when they could be building it to a much larger audience. And it's really too bad because at the beginning of the 2010s, it did seem like the immersive sim was making a bit of a comeback, with Dishonored doing very well, and the year before, Deus Ex Human Revolution doing very well and selling well. But unfortunately, around the same time as Dishonored 2, Mankind Divided, the sequel to Deus Ex Human Revolution, was released. And while it did okay, its sales were a disappointment and the franchise was put on hold. Prey, which also came out the year later from Arkane Studios, was also unfortunately a sales disappointment. Now again, there could be other factors as well in regards to marketing, but this genre for the most part has always been a fairly niche when it comes to things, and the fact that Dishonored 1 sold really well is quite interesting, and it's just too bad that this one did not as well. Now, another factor I've seen thrown around about Dishonored 2 is more of a politically charged topic of Dishonored 2 being woke or progressive or SJW friendly. And now this topic is a minefield, and I want to make my point clear up front that yes, these kind of things of companies trying to make a game woke definitely seems to backfire. You could look at examples like Battlefield 5 trying to push this political agenda into World War II and seeing how sales ended up being far below than what they were expected to be good proof of this. Well, let's talk about the ties of Anita Sarkeesian to Dishonored 2. Now, that's a whole topic right in of itself, but you could do any little bit of research to show how much of a scammer, a conner, a charlatan that she is. But if you look up any information about her on Dishonored 2, there's a lot of these articles that seem to point to her being the reason that you're able to play as Emily, or because of addressing the issues she had with women in the first game. There's a really fascinating video on YouTube from E3 the year after the game was released, where Anita is interviewing the game director, Harvey Smith. He looks very uncomfortable around her. But watching it, it's just kind of a mention he makes about it. There's no way it implies that, oh, she was the reason for this. But of course, game journalists, being who they are, went with that direction. I did find another video before the game was released where they were talking about it, and how Harvey Smith mentions that allowing you to play as Emily came up naturally in conversation. I mean, people liked Emily in the first game, so why not move it to the future and have her play part in it, which is what they did. So playing through Dishonored 2, I didn't find anything that really made any major political or ideological pushing that could have come from it, as we've seen in recent years, like Battlefield 5. So while tying this game with her definitely does not help future sales for it, I don't think it really played much of a factor in this one. What about changing trends? Well, there was 4 years in between the releases of Dishonored 1 and 2. Dishonored 1 coming out near the end of 2012, with Dishonored 2 coming out at the end of 2016. And there were changes in the game industry then. We saw the unfortunate rise of microtransactions making their way from mobile games more into console and PC games. Looking at the list of best-selling games through that time, or most enjoyed games, or highly critical acclaimed games, unlike what EA says, a lot of them were single-player based games. So I do not think it was an issue of changing trends. I also mentioned the point of marketing. Perhaps the marketing wasn't strong enough for this. It's really hard to say. There's no one major factor that could have played into this. And who knows how much of it falls on Bethesda as a publisher, that while the game was probably profitable from its sales, it was fairly far down from the previous title. And from there, they decided, no, let's not go with it. Let's go release the 84th version of Skyrim. It's really hard to say. I would have loved to see a Dishonored 3. There's still a whole bunch in this world that can be explored, interesting ideas. Maybe if they did have another chance, they could really pull it together, try it with some new characters, and maybe build characters that are ones that we could care about more and really tie that in, because I really, really enjoy this series. It's definitely one of the more interesting series to pop up the last decade, but it just falls just short of what I call classic territory, something that I would put to compare like the Thief and the Thief 2 games into. It falls just short of it. And it's really too bad we won't see a Dishonored 3. But if you are on the fence about it, I do highly recommend giving it a chance. Now, like I said, especially on PC, the release is still kind of but of course, if you have a decent PC, that shouldn't be an issue at this point. But it's worth a shot to, if you really enjoyed the first one and you've kind of been holding off trying this one, do it. I think overall I did enjoy the game better. The missions were more thought out. I preferred the chaos system. There's still just a few things that carried over from that first Dishonored that, unfortunately, I thought they would take care of in the sequel, but they didn't. That's been my thoughts on Dishonored 2. If you've stayed through this, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. I'm going to have more analysis of games as I go on, more individual games like this. I will have other videos just more on various topics. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video.